red eyes in the snowy woods. It was late December, just a few days before Christmas, when my friends Jake, Emma, Megan, and I decided to embark on a camping trip to a secluded forest in Washington state. The idea came from Jake, who had read about a beautiful frozen stream hidden deep within the woods, promised to be a perfect escape from the holiday rush. The four of us packed our camping gear, loaded up Jake's SUV, and brought along my dog, Rocky, a brave Labrador mix. The drive was filled with laughter and festive songs. Snow covered the roads, and the frosted trees lining the highway shimmered in the sunlight. Everything seemed magical as we journeyed 3 hours away from the nearest town. By mid-morning, we arrived at the edge of the forest. The trail leading to the stream was blanketed in snow, but we were eager to explore. After setting up our tents, we decided to enjoy the day by collecting firewood, grilling meat, and basking in the peaceful atmosphere. Rocky frolicked in the snow, his tail wagging with joy. As noon approached, the weather abruptly changed. The sky darkened, and a bitter wind swept through the forest. We huddled around the fire, roasting marshmallows and laughing, when Rocky began barking furiously toward the stream. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, but Rocky wouldn't stop. His ears were pinned back, his gaze locked on the water. We followed his line of sight and froze. In the middle of the icy stream, a girl in a white dress was flailing, her arms reaching out as if pleading for help. Her long black hair clung to her face, and her movements were frantic. "She's drowning!" Megan screamed. Without hesitation, Jake and I ran toward the stream, but as we approached, the figure vanished. The water rippled gently, but there was no trace of the girl. "Did you see that?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. Megan and Emma nodded silently. We returned to the campsite, shaken and unable to explain what had just happened. The fire's warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled in my chest. By the time we packed up, the sun had already set. The forest was cloaked in darkness, and the icy wind howled through the trees. As we loaded the SUV, Rocky started barking again, his gaze fixed on the stream. I felt an inexplicable fear as I glanced at the water one last time. The drive back was tense. The narrow road wound through the forest, and the headlights barely pierced the darkness. We were the only car on the road when suddenly, the SUV slammed into something with a loud thud. Jake hit the brakes, and we all jolted forward. "What was that?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. Jake and I stepped out to investigate and found a massive log lying across the road. Strangely, it hadn't been there just moments ago. As we moved the log, a strange feeling washed over me, like we were being watched. Once the SUV was back on the road, we sped away, desperate to leave the forest behind. Exhausted and cold, we were relieved when we saw lights flickering in the distance. A small house stood at the edge of the forest, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. A Christmas tree decorated with tinsel and baubles stood outside the door, covered in snow. We knocked on the door, and a young woman answered. She wore a white dress, her long black hair tied back. There was something eerily familiar about her, but I couldn't place where I'd seen her before. "Please come in," she said, her voice soft. "It's too cold to stay outside." The interior of the house was warm and inviting. A fireplace crackled in the corner, and soft Christmas music played from an old radio. The woman introduced herself as Lily and offered us food and drinks. She explained that the nearest mechanic was miles away and that we could spend the night in her home. We accepted her offer, grateful for her hospitality. The night passed in laughter and warmth, and we all fell asleep near the fire, feeling safe for the first time since leaving the stream. I woke to a bone-chilling draft. The fireplace was cold and dead, and the house looked completely different. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the once cheerful Christmas decorations were faded and broken. "Guys, wake up!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. One by one, my friends stirred, their faces mirroring my confusion and fear. The food and drinks from the night before had rotted, the plates crawling with mold. "Where's Lily?" Megan whispered, her eyes wide. We searched the house but found no trace of her. In a corner of the room, Jake discovered something that made him gasp. Sitting on the floor was a skeletal figure, its body curled into a fetal position. The tattered remains of a white dress clung to its bones. That can't be her," Emma stammered, backing away in horror. On the floor near the skeleton lay a photograph. It was an old, faded picture of a young woman standing by the stream. My blood ran cold as I recognized her face. It was Lily, the same girl we'd seen the night before and the same figure we had seen drowning in the stream. We stumbled out of the house, desperate to escape. As we ran to the SUV, I glanced back and saw a shadow in the window. It was Lily, her glowing red eyes watching us as we fled. Rocky barked wildly, his fur standing on end. Back in town, we went straight to the police. They accompanied us back to the house. But when we arrived, the building was nothing but ruins. The walls had collapsed long ago, and the Christmas decorations were buried under snow and debris. The skeleton and photograph were nowhere to be found. One of the officers, an older man, told us a chilling story. Decades ago, a young woman had drowned in the stream. Her death was ruled an accident, but rumors spread that her spirit haunted the area, luring unsuspecting travelers to their doom. 7. Reflections. We returned home shaken but relieved to have escaped with our lives. As Christmas came and went, I couldn't stop thinking about Lily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face and the haunting red glow of her eyes. Was she a restless spirit seeking revenge? Or was she simply lonely, longing for company in the desolate woods? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. I'll never forget the terror of that night or the lingering presence of the girl in white who haunts the snowy forest. The Haunting in Boston Apartment. Lena Green, a 28-year-old creative professional, was eagerly waiting for her boyfriend Victor, who was flying in from Almaty, Kazakhstan, to visit her in Boston. Victor, a software engineer, had spent over 17 hours traveling to see Lena, whom he deeply loved. Lena lived in a fifth-floor apartment of an old building in Beacon Hill, known for its historical architecture and mysterious charm. That morning, Boston was unusually cold, with a light snowfall blanketing the streets. Victor, exhausted from his long journey, headed straight to the bathroom for a shower. Lena, still drowsy, decided to remain in bed. She drifted back to sleep but was soon awakened by a light pat on her forehead and a warm kiss. Lena opened her eyes, feeling the warmth of the kiss lingering, but the room was empty. Assuming it was Victor, she called out, "Victor, you startled me." But then Victor yelled from the bathroom, "Lena, stop playing. Help me open the door." Startled, Lena ran to the bathroom. The door wasn't locked. When she gently pushed it, it opened easily, leaving Victor baffled. He swore the door had been stuck, as though someone was holding it shut from the outside. The next day, Lena and Victor decided to visit a famous Buddhist temple in Chinatown. While Victor spoke to the head monk, Lena wandered outside the temple courtyard. A young novice monk approached her, staring intently behind her shoulder. "There's something following you," the boy said softly, his voice laced with concern. "What do you mean?" Lena asked, unnerved. Without answering, the boy tugged at her hand and led her into the temple. He handed her a red thread bracelet with 8 knots, saying, "Keep this. It will protect you." Lena took the bracelet, thanking the boy but feeling uneasy. On their way back to the apartment, an angry voice rang out from the bedroom as they entered. "Leave!" The voice was so clear and furious that Lena froze. She stumbled backward and bumped into Victor. When she explained what she had heard, Victor tried to calm her, reasoning that it could have been an echo or the building's old pipes. That evening, the couple decided to watch an episode of their favorite show, Supernatural. As they immersed themselves in the storyline, a faint woman's laughter echoed through the room. Lena paused the show, but the laughter continued, soft and chilling, as if coming from a corner of the room. "Did you hear that?" Victor asked, his face pale. Lena nodded, scanning the room for the source. Then, they heard a faint humming, a haunting melody in Cantonese, possibly a song like Tears of Love. Both sat frozen, the room's temperature seeming to drop. Before bed, Victor decided to scatter salt around the apartment as a protective measure. He went to the kitchen to retrieve the salt but froze when he saw a shadowy figure sitting on the countertop. The figure was tall and broad, its face obscured in darkness. Victor quickly turned on the light, and the figure vanished. "We can't stay here," Victor said, his voice trembling, desperate for some semblance of control. Lena suggested reciting Buddhist mantras to dispel the spirit. As they began, a whispering voice crept into the room. "Don't!" Moments later, a loud and terrifying shout echoed through the apartment. "No!" That night, Lena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt a hand lightly tapping her shoulder, as if trying to wake her. Victor, usually rational and composed, admitted he heard footsteps pacing the living room throughout the night. The next morning, they reached out to Harold Baines, a local paranormal investigator renowned for his expertise in Boston's supernatural history. After listening to their experiences, Harold agreed to help. Harold joined Lena and Victor at the apartment with his equipment, including electromagnetic field detectors and audio recorders. Upon entering the bedroom, his devices detected a strong energy field. Lena felt a presence looming behind her, whispering unintelligible words. While investigating, Harold discovered a hidden compartment beneath the living room floor. Inside was an old, weathered journal belonging to a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the apartment in the 1930s. The journal revealed a tragic story. Eleanor had been abandoned by her unfaithful husband during a harsh winter. Consumed by grief and anger, she had died in the apartment under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit, restless and embittered, had likely lingered there ever since. Harold performed a cleansing ritual using cedarwood smoke and sea salt to banish Eleanor's spirit. During the ritual, the apartment felt suffocatingly heavy. Lena and Victor heard a piercing scream, followed by an eerie silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and for the first time, the apartment felt calm. Although the ritual seemed successful, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's spirit hadn't entirely moved on. One night, as she stood on the balcony looking out at the city, she thought she saw faint, glowing eyes watching her from the street below. But when she blinked, they were gone. Unable to continue living in the apartment, Lena and Victor decided to move out. The haunting memories stayed with them, but they found solace in leaving the past behind. Years later, Lena occasionally thinks about Eleanor. She wonders if the restless spirit has finally found peace or if she still lingers, a silent guardian of the old apartment in Beacon Hill. The haunting of Eleanor's apartment became yet another chilling tale woven into the supernatural lore of Boston, a city steeped in mystery and shadows. The Nightmare Before Christmas. In the small English village of Wintry Hollow, nestled among snowy fields and cobblestone streets, Christmas Eve was always a magical time. The air smelled of pine, roasted chestnuts, and the anticipation of gifts. Families gathered around their fireplaces. Children hung their stockings, and the village square sparkled with lights. But for two young boys, Charlie Watson and his best friend Peter Collins, this Christmas Eve was destined to be unlike any other, not filled with magic, but with terror. Charlie, an adventurous 10-year-old with freckles and a love for mischief, lived with his parents in a cozy cottage at the edge of the village. Peter, slightly younger but no less daring, lived just 2 houses down. The two boys spent most of their time together, from building snow forts to hunting for monsters in the nearby woods. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Charlie's parents announced unexpected news. "Charlie," his mother said as she buttoned her coat, "your father and I need to attend to an emergency. We'll be gone overnight, but we'll be back tomorrow morning. You'll stay with Peter at the Collins house. All right? Why can't I stay home?" Charlie pouted. "It's not safe for you to be alone, and Peter's parents are away too. Mrs. Miller next door will check on you both. It'll be fun, just you and Peter, like a sleepover." Reluctantly, Charlie agreed. By late afternoon, he had packed a small bag and trudged through the snow to Peter's house. Peter greeted him at the door, grinning from ear to ear. "We'll stay up all night and catch Santa." The Collins house was a quaint 2-story home with creaky wooden floors and a chimney that seemed tailor-made for Santa. The boys spent the early evening watching Christmas cartoons, eating cookies, and discussing their foolproof plan to finally see Santa Claus. "He'll definitely come," Peter said with a confident nod. "I left out milk and the best cookies we have." "And a carrot for the reindeer?" Charlie teased. "Of course," Peter replied, "but we have to stay awake. No falling asleep." As the clock struck 9, the boys set up their Santa trap, a string of jingle bells tied to the living room door handle, and a motion-activated flashlight aimed at the fireplace. They sprawled out on the living room floor under thick blankets, their eyes fixed on the fireplace. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the window panes. Snowflakes danced in the dim glow of the street lamp across the road. All seemed peaceful, at least for now. It was close to midnight when the first strange sound broke the silence. A faint scratching noise echoed from the back door. "Did you hear that?" Charlie whispered, sitting upright. Peter nodded, his eyes wide. "Maybe it's just the wind." The scratching grew louder, like fingernails scraping against wood. The boys exchanged nervous glances. "Let's check it out," Charlie said, his voice trembling slightly. Armed with a flashlight and a cricket bat they found by the fireplace, the boys tiptoed toward the kitchen. The back door was locked, but the sound persisted. Charlie shone the flashlight on the frosted window and saw nothing, just the empty snow-covered yard. "It's probably an animal," Peter said, trying to sound brave. But as they returned to the living room, they both felt a growing unease. Back in the living room, the boys huddled under their blankets, trying to ignore the eerie creaks and groans of the old house. Then came the whispers, faint at first. They sounded like distant voices carried by the wind. But as the minutes passed, The whispers grew louder, clearer, and they were coming from inside the house. "Who's there?" Charlie shouted, his voice cracking. The whispers stopped abruptly. Peter clutched his friend's arm. "It's just our imagination. Let's stay by the fireplace and wait for Santa." The boys tried to convince themselves it was nothing, but then the shadows appeared. From the corner of their eyes, they saw faint movements, dark shapes gliding across the walls, darting just out of sight. When they turned their heads, the shadows were gone. "I'm scared," Peter admitted, his voice barely audible. Charlie tried to appear brave. "It's probably just the firelight." But deep down, he knew something was wrong. Just as the clock struck midnight, there was a loud knock at the front door. The boys froze. "Who would come here this late?" Peter whispered. The knock came again, louder this time, summoning what little courage they had. The boys crept toward the door. Charlie reached for the doorknob, but Peter grabbed his arm. "Wait, what if it's not a person?" Charlie hesitated, then peered through the peephole. First, he saw nothing but the swirling snow. But then, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, cloaked, and holding a large sack. "It's Santa!" Peter exclaimed. Charlie wasn't so sure. The figure's face was obscured by shadows, and there was something unsettling about the way it stood perfectly still, staring at the door. Against his better judgment, Charlie opened the door. The figure stepped inside, towering over the boys. His red suit was tattered, his boots caked with mud, and his sack, it seemed to writhe, as if something inside it was moving. "Merry Christmas," the figure said in a deep, gravelly voice, but it didn't sound cheerful. It sounded hungry. Peter backed away, clutching Charlie's arm. "You're not Santa," he whispered. The figure's grin widened, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "Aren't I?" he said, stepping closer. Suddenly, the bells on the door handle jingled, breaking the tension. The boys bolted for the stairs, their hearts pounding. Behind them, the figure laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the house. The boys raced to Peter's bedroom and slammed the door. Charlie pushed a chair against the doorknob, while Peter searched for something to defend themselves with. "What is he?" Peter whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know," Charlie replied, his voice shaking. "But he's not Santa." From downstairs came the sound of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. Then, the whispers returned, louder and closer than before. The boys huddled in the corner, clutching a lamp as their only weapon. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The doorknob twisted, and the chair blocking the door creaked under the pressure. Then, everything went silent. For what felt like an eternity, the boys waited, holding their breath. Finally, Charlie mustered the courage to peek through the keyhole. On the other side, he saw nothing. The hallway was empty. "He's gone," Charlie whispered, but as he turned back to Peter, a low voice filled the room. "You can't hide forever." The boys spun around and saw the figure standing by the window, its sack writhing more violently than ever. It opened the sack, and a cold, dark mist began to pour out, filling the room with an unbearable chill. Just as the boys thought all hope was lost, the sound of real bells echoed from outside. Bright light flooded the room, and the dark figure recoiled, hissing. Through the window, the boys saw a sleigh pulled by reindeer descending from the sky. The real Santa Claus burst into the room, wielding a staff that glowed with golden light. "Begone, spirit," he commanded. The dark figure let out a final shriek before dissolving into the mist. Santa turned to the boys, his warm smile a stark contrast to the terror they had just endured. "You've been brave," he said. "Now, let's make this a Christmas to remember." By dawn, the nightmare had faded, replaced by the joy of Christmas morning. Charlie and Peter sat by the tree, opening gifts and recounting their harrowing adventure. Though they would never forget the terror of that Christmas Eve, they also learned something extraordinary, that even in the darkest of nights, there is always a light to guide the way. A haunting Christmas Eve in Italy. In 1998, Alessandro Ricci worked as a car insurance salesman in Siena, a quaint city in the heart of Tuscany, Italy. My life was simple yet routine, commuting daily from my suburban home, located on the outskirts of a dense pine forest. Beyond the forest lay an old cemetery, neglected for decades, its crumbling tombstones veiled in ivy. I passed it every day on my way to work, never giving it much thought, until one fateful Christmas season. That December, a cold snap swept across the region, cloaking the countryside in frost. My family and I were excited to celebrate Christmas, but the biting chill seemed to seep into our very souls. Little did I know, this would be a Christmas I'd never forget. On the evening of December 23rd, my family retired early, exhausted from the preparations. A habitual night owl, stayed up late in the living room with a cup of espresso, scrolling through newspapers and listening to faint Christmas tunes playing on the radio. Midnight came and went, the silence of the house punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the fireplace. At exactly 12 a.m., an unfamiliar sound startled me, the sharp chime of an alarm clock. I frowned. I didn't own an alarm clock, and certainly not one set for midnight. Before I could investigate, a haunting melody began to fill the air. It was Merry Christmas, but distant and distorted, as though carried on a ghostly wind. I froze as a chilling whisper echoed in my ears. "Lan qua," cold in my mother tongue. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the living room, heading straight for me. Terrified, I bolted from the couch, only to find myself sitting upright in bed, my mother knocking on the door, calling me for breakfast. It was all just a dream, or so I thought. As I got ready, my stomach twisted when I saw the window in my room. There were black handprints smudged across the frosted glass. I chose to ignore it and went about my day as usual, trying to shake off the eerie sense of dread. Christmas Eve arrived, and like tradition, I planned to attend midnight mass at the local church. My family was busy, so I had to go alone. The church lay beyond the same forest and cemetery I crossed daily. By 9 p.m., I bundled up and left, my breath visible in the frigid air as I trudged toward the church. The mass was peaceful, the choir's hymns warming the cold stone walls of the sanctuary. After the service, the congregation dispersed, leaving me to walk back home under the pale light of a crescent moon. As I approached the cemetery, the wind picked up, carrying faint strains of music. My ears pricked up as I recognized the haunting melody of Merry Christmas. This time, it was louder, accompanied by a whisper, "Lan qua." My heart pounded as I peered into the darkness. Near one of the larger graves, I saw it, a shadowy figure sitting atop a weathered tombstone, his glowing red eyes fixed on me. My breath caught in my throat. Against every instinct, I rolled down the car window, curiosity overriding fear. The figure didn't move but seemed to beckon me with its gaze. Unable to resist, I got out of the car and stepped toward the graveyard. The music grew louder, blending with soft whispers that seemed to come from every direction. My flashlight flickered as I approached the tombstone where the shadow had been. But it was gone. In its place was an old photograph, half buried in the snow. The picture was of a young woman, her eyes hollow yet captivating. She wore a black dress and held a candle, her gaze both sorrowful and accusatory. My chest tightened. I realized I had seen her before. The shadowy figure matched her face perfectly. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind knocked the flashlight out of my hand. The whispers turned to wails, and I ran back to my car, slamming the door and speeding away. Back home, I locked every window and door, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my heart race. Around 3 a.m., I heard faint scratching at the window near my bed. Gathering my courage, I drew the curtain, but there was nothing there, just a frosty imprint of a hand. The rest of the night was spent in restless vigil, my eyes darting between the window and the clock, waiting for dawn to break. The next morning, the sun's rays finally dispelled the suffocating gloom. Determined to find answers, I decided to return to the cemetery. This time, I wasn't alone. I asked my friend Marco, a history enthusiast, to accompany me. Together, we delved into the cemetery's history, searching for clues about the woman in the photograph. Marco discovered that the grave belonged to Isabella Ferrara, a young woman who had died tragically on Christmas Eve in 1921. Legend had it that Isabella was traveling to see her fiancé when her carriage overturned near the cemetery. Left alone in the snow, she froze to death, her cries for help unheard. As Marco recounted the story, I couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella's spirit was still searching for someone to hear her. I showed him the photograph, and he turned pale. "This isn't just any photograph," he said. "It's her death portrait." That evening, I returned to the cemetery with candles and flowers. I placed them on Isabella's grave, whispering a prayer for her soul to find peace. The air grew still, and for a brief moment, the cemetery felt almost serene. As I turned to leave, I saw her again, standing near the edge of the forest. This time, her gaze wasn't menacing but filled with gratitude. The whispers had stopped, replaced by the faint strains of Merry Christmas, carried gently on the wind. Epilogue, a haunting memory. I never saw Isabella again, but every Christmas Eve, I leave a candle burning in my window for her. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. While the memories of that haunting Christmas still send shivers down my spine, they also taught me the importance of listening to the voices of the forgotten. Perhaps, in the cold stillness of a snowy night, we can all offer a little warmth to those who wander. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight, exploring these mysterious and spine-chilling stories. If these tales have sparked your curiosity or left you with unforgettable feelings, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had similar paranormal experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to send your story to the email address provided in the description. Who knows? Your story might become part of our journey into the spiritual world in a future episode. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our haunting tales. See you in the next episode, and remember, always keep a light by your side.